The Edmonton Oilers have transformed from an underachieving playoff team into a legitimate, perennial Stanley Cup contender. With elite talent, quality coaching, and maybe a good front office, this might be the best window of Oilers hockey since the glory days. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This is my second Stanley Cup playoff run as host of Locked On Oilers. This is my third NHL season with the Locked On Podcast Network. I couldn't be more glad to be here. I couldn't be more glad to have you here as the Oilers are in the Western Conference Finals for the third time in the last 4 years. I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every day. So on today's show, we are going to walk through how the Oilers have evolved over the last 4 seasons from a regular season darling, perennial preseason Stanley Cup contender into a bona fide, they can win the whole thing team. And that is a multi-year effort. That is an extended period of time. So we're going to start out with, over the last 2 years, what's elevated, what's been different. We're going to start, my opinion, I think Kris Knoblauch's feel for this group is second to none, maybe the most in tune with his team coach in the entire league. If you wanted to argue Paul Maurice of the Florida Panthers, sure. But I'm going to make a strong argument for Kris Knoblauch. The second segment, we're going to talk about how unique the Oilers roster construction is and how they choose to spend their money and what works. And then we're going to tie a bow on it by talking about the results, the actual product out on the ice. So to start things out, I am not going to equivocate here. I'm usually pretty even middle of the road because I don't want to get dunked on by mean people. And unfortunately, no matter what, I'm going to annoy someone with the take I give. The amount of people giving me a problem for saying I thought Vegas would win the series ahead of the series, like Vegas didn't win the Pacific Division and have the 4th best record in the entire league in the regular season. That's not the point. Kris Knoblauch's one of the 5 best coaches in the NHL. I think you can firmly make a case for Knoblauch, for John Cooper. I would personally make a case for Bruce Cassidy. I go back and forth on if Pete DeBoer is a good coach or not. Paul Maurice is in here as well. And Jim Montgomery, I think, belongs in that conversation as the 5 best. There are other guys who are good. Don't get me wrong. I think Craig Berube is in that upper group of that next tier down. I think there are plenty of coaches out there that are capable of being functional coaches. But one of the things that's challenging about hockey in relation to, say, football, baseball, even basketball to some extent, a hockey coach probably has the least direct impact over the course of a game in the result. Because when you go sport by sport, you think about a football. If you're getting killed on the ground and you're a good head coach, you're going to get your defensive coordinator to bring that extra guy down into the box to try and slow it down. And then the inverse, if you're getting killed over the top, you're going to sit in a cover 3 or you're going to sit in a cover 2 and you're going to drop back and try and keep everything in front of you. In baseball, you're going by the percentages. If you're a manager, it's your job to look through how your guys your pitchers deal as the game goes along, times through the lineup. If you're a hitter and you're cold and the certain type of stuff a guy coming out of the bullpen has can be the decision whether or not you get pinch hit for. I think manager in baseball has become really about optimizing what your guys can do. And then in basketball, it's about feel, it's about runs, it's about putting your guys in a position to take advantage of game situations. But in hockey and soccer are very similar in this respect. And the everydayers have heard me make this point before. But in hockey and in soccer, you're not going to change what you're doing systemically. If anything, a coach is married to their system in hockey and in soccer. They are going to double, triple, quintuple down on their system because in their minds, the reason the team isn't winning or playing well is because they're not executing the system well enough. And It can become a challenge in a playoff series where one team refuses to adapt, and the better coaches can adapt. The better coaches in the NHL are the ones who are able to make changes. And in Kris Knoblauch's case, I think what's made him really effective over the last year and a half, 2 years, is the feel he has for the fringe players. And that might be luck. I said this on yesterday's show. He might just be lucky. He might just have the magic fairy dust right now that's putting him in a position to keep guessing right when it comes to lineup substitutions and goaltending management. But over the last 2 years, he has consistently been right. We can look last year in that series against the Canucks. They went to Calvin Pickard for 7 periods. They came back to Stuart Skinner. They won that series. Last year, you think about inserting Philip Broberg into this lineup after basically not playing a whole lot down the stretch in the regular season. You think about how at various points in last year's playoffs, Corey Perry, Warren Fogle, Ryan McLeod, Cody Ceci, and Vincent Desharnais all were healthy scratched at some point. Connor Brown, who was Kris Knoblauch's captain in junior hockey on his team when Knoblauch was the coach of the Erie Otters, he healthy bombed him to play Dylan Holloway. That was only last year. And then you get to this year. You talk about the goalie management again, where Skinner loses the first 2. You go to Pickard, you win 6 in a row. Then you lose because Pickard gets hurt. Skinner comes in. Skinner loses the 1 game. They lose game 3. He bounces back. He's lights out. He's shuts the Golden Knights out for 2 straight games. And then on top of that, not only did he have the conviction to go back to Stuart Skinner, who nobody believed in, he also was looking around the margins and said, I'd like to get Troy Stecher in there for Ty Emberson. I trust him a little bit more. I trust Troy Stecher a little bit more than Ty Emberson. I think I can play Stecher more minutes in a game than I can Ty Emberson. So I'd like to do that. And then the really gutsy one to me, and it's not even gutsy, but the sign that Knoblauch knows what he needs is that they went to Kapanen over Arvidsson, and Arvidsson's supposed to be on the team next year. He's under contract for next season, and he's currently sitting on the bench. This is a priority day 1 of free agency signing Victor Arvidsson, and Kris Knoblauch is looking at Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner, who are not playing, and saying, I think I'm good. I think I'd rather have Trent Frederick. I think I would rather have Kasperi Kapanen because of the opportunities they're going to give me. And then to tie a bow on this, the lineup permutations, the fact that for a while the Oilers were running hot with McDavid, Draisaitl, Corey Perry as their first line. And then down the backstretch of game number 4 and then most of game 5, Connor and Leon were on separate lines. Kris Knoblauch reunited his favorite defensive line. He put Podkolzin back with Draisaitl and Kapanen, and they gave them the Eichel minutes, and they won the Eichel minutes outright. And that makes the lineup so much deeper when you can run 2 different types of forward lines. And then on top of that, you have the added juice of going back to the line permutations from the best win in the series against Vegas, where you had McDavid, Draisaitl, Perry, Kane, Nugent-Hopkins, Hyman, Adam Henrique, Connor Brown, and Frederick. And then that 4th line, the piecemeal 4th line of Janmark and others. But like that level of understanding of his team and the comfort he has putting guys in different spots and knowing what he's going to get out of them. That is a coach that I don't want to say I unequivocally defer to, but Knoblauch has a really good feel for his team. And there are not a lot of coaches in the NHL who find a way to put their guys in the best possible spot. A lot of coaches are stubborn. A lot of coaches are going to cling to, well, I do it this way, so you do it that way, or you're not going to play, or you're going to play less, or you're going to play lower in the lineup. And Kris Knoblauch, to his credit, has really maximized what this group can do, especially in the playoffs. And if he continues to guess right on these lineup decisions, who am I to tell him he's wrong? Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, I'm going to explain why the roster construction is so unique among Stanley Cup contenders and why it works. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. There's nothing like playoff hockey. The energy, the rivalries, the non-stop action. With the Stanley Cup playoffs heating up, there's never been a better time to get to a game live. And Game Time makes getting in the building fast and affordable. Game Time gives you last-minute ticket deals, zone deals for deep discounts, panoramic seat views, and all-in pricing with no hidden fees. Plus, ticket prices often drop the closer you get to puck drop, so you can score big without overpaying. You guys know the everydayers have heard me talk about the variety of crazy playoff games I've been to. Rangers Penguins Game 7 in 2022. I went to the Barclay Gaudreau game 2 of the conference finals in 2024. I went to the Stadium Series game last year between the Rangers and Islanders, and there really is nothing like hockey in person. And if you have the opportunity, you need to go check out at Game Time to get yourself in the door to experience the energy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are breaking down how the Oilers have evolved from regular season darlings to scary Stanley Cup contenders. And I know this is a played out talking point, but I do want to reiterate it real quick. To win the Stanley Cup eventually, you need this playoff trauma. You need to lose. Part of getting better, especially for your stars who you keep for the long haul, is losing, and losing in painful fashion, so you have experience to draw upon. You think about where the Lightning were in 2020, where they'd been to a Stanley Cup final, they'd been to a couple of conference finals, and the year before they eventually won the Stanley Cup, they were bounced in 4 games by a lame duck Blue Jackets team whose 3 best players, Sergei Bobrovsky, Artemi Panarin, and Matt Duchene, all left in free agency. The Lightning very easily could have said, we can't win with this group. We need to trade Stamkos or Kucherov or Point or Hedman or McDonough. And the Lightning stuck to the plan. You think about the Avalanche, who drafted Nathan McKinnon 8 years before they won the Stanley Cup eventually. It's a long time. You think about the Capitals, all of the misery they endured in the playoffs, the amount of times they lost to Sid and the Penguins in the second round or in a first round series, and they eventually broke through. And the Oilers needed that. That was part of going from nice regular season team to good to Stanley Cup caliber good. That is an inevitable part of this process. It is very rare for a team to break through almost instantly. That type of breakthrough is very infrequent in hockey. And I think some of it is tied to the high variance nature of the sport, that all it takes is a good week or a good few games and you steal one. And I think for the Oilers, losing in the conference final the way they did a couple years ago to Vegas, losing to Colorado when Colorado was on the way to winning the Stanley Cup, losing last year in the Stanley Cup final to Florida. I think there's a lot of value in having those types of difficult experiences, because when you play the other teams that have been there over and over and over again, like they might if they played the Stars, and the Stars and Jets are about to have puck drop in about 5-10 minutes from the time of this recording. If they play the Stars again, that's a team that's been to a couple conference finals, that went to a Stanley Cup final, that has themselves a blue chip big dog in Mikko Rantanen, who's getting his name in the same sentences as guys like Mario Lemieux for the playoffs he's having right now. And that consistent playoff appearances, some of it is just luck of the draw. Some years, your playoff format, it's going to work in your favor. You're going to get an easier path to the conference final than you would in other years. I would argue last year was as easy as it's going to get. And to the Canucks' credit, they did take the Oilers to 7 games, but that Canucks team, very, very fugazi in the respect of being so shooting luck dependent. And you see how fugazi it was by the way this year went. And look, big picture wise, you can always argue why teams eventually break through. But in the Oilers' case, they have found close to an optimal roster construction for their salary cap situation. There is no better efficiency in the NHL today than having a superstar. And let me explain. Number one, you get the guy who's going to put up between 90 and 120 points every year. Number two, because the NHL has been operating in a depressed wage market where players have not been able to grow their earnings commensurate with revenue growth because of COVID for 4 years now. And now we're going to see our first real jump. Mitch Marner very easily could clear what Leon Draisaitl is getting on his next contract. And Leon's worth it. I would argue Mitch Marner's worth it. I know that's going to be an unpopular opinion. I know the Leafs are everyone's favorite punching bag this time of year, but the Leafs are paying for high-end talent, and the high-end talent is one of the prerequisites to win. And the Oilers, very, very luckily, drafted their two guys. You have Connor and Leon for the last season where it's going to be under $30 million for the two of them. You have Evan Bouchard on a bridge deal. Ekholm, reasonably priced. Evander Kane, a little pricey for when they signed him, but like it's not crazy if he plays. Hyman's number's fine. You're paying, I think, the 29th combined cap hit for goalies. You are putting all of your money in your big guns and some nice supporting pieces. And then one of the beautiful parts of becoming a perennial Stanley Cup contender is that it's a self-fulfilling cycle. Because as you consistently stay in that conference final range, when free agents become available, you become a desirable landing spot. You think about some of the depressed value players the Oilers have accumulated over the years, whether that's Evander Kane because of the situation with the Sharks and they bought him out because he violated his contract. You talk about Corey Perry, who was waived from Chicago. You talk about John Klingberg coming off of a major injury. You talk about Jeff Skinner getting bought out. You talk about Victor Arvidsson coming off of a major injury. And all of those guys looked at the Oilers and said, I will take less money than I could get from a bad team. I will come here. I will have an opportunity to contend for a Stanley Cup. I will have an opportunity to play with Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl to put up counting stats. That way, even if we don't eventually win the Stanley Cup, I'm going to be able to hold out a sheet that says I put 48 points on the board playing 14, 15 minutes a night, and I wasn't on power play one. Think about what I could do for your team if you give me 18 minutes a night and you bump me up to power play 2, and occasionally you let me ride with your best player. That's why this becomes self-fulfilling. You look at how free agency has evolved over the years, and you look at the way certain teams use it. You look at the way Florida used it to assemble a good chunk of the team that won the Stanley Cup last year, especially when we're talking about the bottom half of that lineup. You look at the way a team like Tampa Bay has scrounged up the bargain bin and tried to develop guys to fill out that bottom six. And the Oilers have found a way slowly but surely. And yeah, are they paying a little bit too much for guys like Perry, like Janmark, like Henrique? Did they really need raises? And I know Henrique's, I'm calling Henrique's raise on last year's number a raise because his prorated salary was less year over year than what it is right now on the new deal he signed. But he chose to stay in Edmonton. He had other teams. I believe the Lightning were one of the teams that were linked to Adam Henrique last summer as far as landing spots go. And to their credit, the Oilers have pieced together a group, and you can make an argument they haven't even reached optimum efficiency because they have like $5 million in Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson not even playing. There's an argument to be made. The Oilers could do even better designing their roster going forward. And coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, I'm going to tell you why the results on the ice tell the rest of the story. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we send you into the weekend. And we will have a conference finals series preview for you on Monday, depending how Jets Stars goes. If they go to a game 7, that game would be played on, I believe, Saturday night. So in theory, Joey Erickson and I, Joey Erickson of Locked On Stars, should be able to record our crossover on Sunday at some point, and that'll run on Monday. And then I will do a deep dive, specifically me, things I'm going to look out for, things I'm curious about. But for now, And I said this last night, and I want to reiterate it now. If you're not an everyday or if you're new here, welcome. I'm glad you're here. The Oilers over the last 2 years have shown you that they can play a lot of different styles of hockey games. They won 1-0 in overtime against the Vegas Golden Knights with Stuart Skinner out-dueling Adin Hill with a game-winning goal from Kasperi Kapanen. Not even within the first 1,000 guesses for how I would have predicted an Oilers-Knights closeout game to go. You think about how they found ways in that Kings series where their penalty kill was conceding power play goals 60% of the time, and the Oilers still found a way to win those games. If you have the capacity to win games 1-0 and 5-4, you are a pretty well-rounded team. And it gets back to something I talked about in the middle of the week. I believe it was after game 4, the game the Oilers played their best game of the series. It's not only are the Oilers controlling the game, it's that all 4 of their lines are actively contributing at 5-on-5. And that leaves room to be even better on special teams, which I do hope and think the Oilers will get some opportunities. Now, when you have the luxury of winning 70 to 75% of the minutes in a game, and that's generally what an even strength hockey game is based on the NHL's data, about 70-75% of the available minutes, that's a good chunk of the game. And you think about how well you can control those segments of the game when you can split Connor and Leon up. And if you split those 2 up and you find a way for the occasional Bouchard shift to be with one of the bottom 2 lines, you are having probably the best or second best player on the ice at all times. And that is a luxury most teams don't have. Does a team like Florida have that, where they could play Barkov or Tkachuk separate from each other? Yeah, those guys are in the argument where they might always be the best player on the ice. Vegas, I don't know anymore. Mark Stone just can't stay healthy enough for me. I think Mark Stone's a great player, but his inability to stay healthy is a real concern. I think Dallas, I love Rope Hintz. He's one of my favorite players in the entire NHL to watch. A transition demon, someone that if the Oilers are going to play again, I think might be the fulcrum that makes that Rantanen line go with Mikael Granlund, the 3 Finns from the national team together on that first line. I mean, the Stars are so deep. They've been playing Jason Robertson and Wyatt Johnston on their third line. And I think Jason Robertson was a top 20 player in the NHL 2 years ago. I think Wyatt Johnston is well on his way to being a top 30, 20 player even in the entire league. And they have the capacity, the depth to play those guys deeper in the lineup. But what makes this Oilers team different is that they have the capacity for different guys to pick up the slack. And that was something I kept talking about during the regular season over the course of those 82 games. When are the Oilers going to start having their moments? When are we going to have the game that we look back on and go, oh yeah, that's right, they did do that. That was something. Because when you're telling the story of a team, generally, and there are outliers, some teams just go nuclear down a stretch. You think about the 2019 Blues, Team of Destiny. That does happen from time to time. But by and large, the team that goes on to win the Stanley Cup, they have those little flashes throughout the course of the season. And then in the playoffs again, you have those little flashes of, oh, wow, they got a goal from him. In the Oilers case, that's when Janmark scores. That's when Trent Frederick scores. When somebody who's only getting 12, 13 minutes a night chips in a goal, on top of whatever you're going to get from McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Nuge, Evander Kane, what you start sprinkling that in, it becomes really scary. I mean, in the series against the Kings, the Oilers' first line, most common first line, McDavid, Draisaitl, and Perry, outscored the entire Kings team at 5-on-5. I'm going to repeat that. The Kings, the Oilers' first line in that series outscored the Golden Knights at 5-on-5 for the entire series. I know that sounds ludicrous, but it was 14-7 goals at 5-on-5. So I'm going to click over here on my notes because I want to make sure I'm citing the stat correctly. McDavid, Draisaitl, and Perry had 4 goals for. If you look at the Golden Knights forward lines, yes, the Golden Knights, excuse me, I was incorrect. It was 4-4. The McDavid, Draisaitl, Perry line scored 4 5-on-5 goals by themselves. All 4 of the Golden Knights' most common lines, 1 goal each. The Oilers' first line was as good at scoring goals as the entire Golden Knights team. And then you sprinkle in Evander Kane, Nugent, Hyman. You chip in those goals from guys further down the lineup, like a Janmark, like an Adam Henrique picking up a pair of goals in a big game. That's the type of thing you need if you're going to make up for some of your deficiencies. And right now, the Oilers have played well enough at 5-on-5 that the goaltending being as mediocre as it was for the first every game in the playoffs other than the last 2, and the power play only being okay. They still have yet to score a power play goal on the road, which is mystifying to me. And their penalty kill has just been mediocre. They're the worst of the teams that are still left, and it's getting better as the playoffs go along. It was never going to be as bad as it was during the King series for the duration of the entire playoffs. It would have to be almost an act of God for their penalty kill to be that bad for that long. But the Oilers have taken real strides over the last few years, and nothing happens for one reason. You have medium, long, and short-range causes that get you to a place. A lot of the Oilers' work to get here came when they weren't in the playoffs. It was when McDavid and Draisaitl were taking their lumps on bad teams with guys like Milan Lucic, with guys like Zach Kassian. Now, you have the luxury of picking who rides with who. Do you want to play Kane up there? Do you want to play Perry up there? Do you want to play someone else? Do you want to play Hyman up there? You have 3 wingers you feel comfortable playing on the first line with McDavid and Draisaitl. You're so deep, you don't even need to play McDavid and Draisaitl with each other, and you still have a chance to win. This has been a really impressive transformation, and it's largely been the guys who have been here. And yeah, they've made very targeted acquisitions for certain types of guys, Hyman in free agency of it, and then we went through the island of misfit toys, the guys who were all cast off from their place, their various previous stops for varying reasons, spending on Matthias Ekholm. When they have made swings, they have hit for the most part. You know, not all of them. Jack Campbell, definitely a flop. Duncan Keith, definitely a flop. But they have, by and large, built out around their foundational guys and then gone out and found guys with very specific skill sets to make a well-rounded, detailed lineup. And now the Oilers can roll 4 lines, and they have multiple permutations of a 4-line forward group that are effective, that can win playoff games. They are equipped to win any game on any night against any opponent. And I'll leave you with this thought as we go into the weekend. If you make it to the conference final, you have the capacity to win the Stanley Cup. If you are in the upper 12% of the NHL, so there's 32 teams, 28 teams are eliminated by the time we start the conference final. That comes out to like 87.5%. You are an upper quartile, not even quartile, upper 12th% team in the entire league. And then as we go along, if you're the first team out, second team out, you lose the cup final, whatever, then we get to what percentile team you were for that given season. But if you're in this group, you have the capacity to win the Stanley Cup. You only got to win 8 out of 14. That's not crazy. 8 out of 14 is not a huge ask. But at the same time, it is the hugest ask. There is no trophy more difficult to win in all of sports. I hope you guys take the weekend. I know the Oilers definitely are, to rest up, to mentally prepare, because next week it is time to really lock in, because the Oilers are 4 wins away from going back to the Stanley Cup Final for a chance to avenge a wrong, and it might be against the team that wronged them. That will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everyone who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. If you're new around here, please join the conversation. I'm replying to every comment I possibly can, as long as you're not being outwardly offensive so the network yells at me for acknowledging it, whatever. If you're reasonable, I'm always more than glad to talk hockey. Subscribe over on YouTube. If you're on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. Reviews help the show get found. More people join the conversation. It opens more doors for us. We can try and get better guests and things of that nature. Thank you so much. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL Game Night after the last game of the night goes final, and Locked On NHL the next day to get the biggest stories going into that night's games. I will talk to you guys on Monday. Everyone have a safe and fun weekend. Until Monday, let's go Oilers.